So hi, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Dora. I'm one of the organizers of Qesher, and you can also find here Sebastian, who is the other one. Our aim with these series is normally to introduce Jewish cities, Jewish countries' heritage. I mean, countries and cities' Jewish heritage. So we normally visit cities or other areas, places, countries, and we learn about Jewish history, Jewish culture, Jewish heritage. And on top of that, we also have our book club series, which I'm sure many of you have attended in the past, in which we invite authors with the Jewish themed books that somehow touch upon Jewish life in the diaspora or Jewish life around the world. And today we're very happy to welcome Julie Zuckerman, who I'm just going to briefly introduce, and then I'll pass the word to her. Julie Zuckerman's debut novel in series, The Book of Jeremiah, was the runner-up for the 2018 Press 53 Award for Short Fiction and was published in May 2019. Her fiction and nonfiction have been published in dozens of literary magazines. She's the founder of Literary Modi'in author series, which hosts authors of novels, story collections, memoirs, and poetry collections with Jewish content. So she also has her own book club series. If anyone's interested in learning about even more books than what we present, then you can also follow Literary Modi'in, which has both in-person and online versions. So I'll pass the word to Julie to introduce herself in a bit more detail, and of course to introduce her book, The Book of Jeremiah. And after her presentation, as always, there will be time for Q&A, so feel free to put your questions in the chat. And Julie, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Thank you so much, Dora, Sebastian. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. I'm enjoying seeing where you're all from. I'm coming to you from Modi'in, Israel. And let me just share my screen now, and if this is the right screen. Yes, you're seeing the right thing? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about my book, Jeremiah, a novel and stories, and I'll do some readings interspersed and kind of tell you how the book came to be, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Literary Modi'in, which we've been comparing notes, and we do a lot of the similar things, and it's great to hear about new books through Qesher, and maybe you'll want to join some of my Literary Modi'in events as well. Anyway, a few little things about me that like aren't in my bio but are relevant to the book is that I come from a Bridgeport, Connecticut area, from a very close-knit family. My grandparents were immigrants from Eastern Europe, from a small shtetl called Kolbashov, which is in Galicia, which changed hands many times and is now in Poland. And on my mother's side, I had great grandparents who were ardent Zionists, although they never made it to Palestine. It was they didn't have enough money, but they did host Ben Gurion on a fundraising trip when he came to Albany. I was very active in I guess it's not so relevant to the book, but was very active in my Jewish youth group and my summer camp, and I moved to Israel in 1995. But I only started writing fiction in 2008 when I was 38. So I made this little slide how it started. So that picture on the left is the park across the street from my house, and I was sitting in the park kind of looking for something to do. I should say I always considered myself a writer. In college, I was very into journalism. I was actually the editor-in-chief of my college paper at Columbia, which I'm glad I'm not there right now. And then when I moved to Israel, I started working in business writing, and then that kind of moved to marketing writing, but I didn't think I was a creative writer. But I was in the park by my house talking to a friend of mine, and I was kind of looking around for something to do. Should I take an art class? Should I I had three little kids at home, but I wanted to do something for myself. And my friend said, "Oh, well, so and so, another mutual friend, she takes creative writing class." I'm like, "Oh my God, that's what I want to do." I was always a very big reader, and I practically ran home from the park and was like, "Where can I take, creative writing classes in Israel in English?" And there is actually a program you can do in English at Bar Ilan University. You can get a full degree, an MFA. But I was, mid-career. I wasn't ready to give up my day job, but I called one of the people who worked there, and she recommended some woman in Jerusalem who was just teaching like classes in her home. And from the minute I started taking this class, I loved it. I just fell in love with creative writing. She gave us a prompt every week. Come in next week with up to 4 pages, double spaced on this prompt. And it could be a short story, it could be memoir, it could be a poem. And I just fell in love with all of it. I like coming up. I'm a bit of an insomniac, so this really helped me, like lying in bed at night. I think about my stories, how I'm going to make them work, and how can I make them entertaining, and who are my characters. But I also love the act of putting the words down on paper. And then, so I took that writing class for about a year or so, and it was a very wonderful place to start. And then I moved to a different teacher, and my next teacher, at the end of the first class, I said, like, "Okay, what's the prompt for the next time?" He's like, "Oh no, I don't believe in prompts." Like, no, I really do much better when I have a prompt. So we went back and forth a little bit, and he eventually agreed to give a prompt. It was an optional for everybody in the class, and the prompt was, write something about yourself. Sorry, erase that. Write about a character who is not yourself, who does something that that you're interested in, or you don't necessarily need to know a lot about this interest, but you need to be curious about it. And I wrote a story about an 82 who takes up baking after his wife dies. And so 82-year-old man, definitely not me, but baking is something I like to do. And so when I finished writing that story, which is called Mixmaster, which is actually ends up being the final story in the book, I kind of fell in love with this character. I was curious, even more curious about him. He's kind of this kind of crusty old guy, a little bit infuriating to his family, is deeply grieving his wife, but he's also kind of a funny guy. And so I wanted to know, like, and the character's name was Jeremiah. How did Jeremiah get to be the man he is today at age 82? And as soon as I finished writing that story, I said, okay, I want to write a whole book about him and kind of unravel his life. And I had also recently read the book Olive Kittredge by Elizabeth Strout that won the Pulitzer back in, I think, 2008. And that is also a novel in stories, where with each story, you kind of get to know a little bit more about Olive's character. It's like unraveling an onion or something, like peeling an onion. And so I knew right away I wanted to write a whole book about Jeremiah. So that whole process took a long time, and it actually, in the book finally, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the process later, but it finally came out in 2019. That's me talking to at a bookstore in Asheville, North Carolina, to about an audience about 5 people. But they were very engaged. And then right around the same time, I started this literary series called Literary Modi'in, where I bring 3 authors each time to talk about their books for about 15 minutes each. At the time, it was just an occasional thing every couple months, and I was bringing mostly English-speaking writers to Modi'in, which is my city. It's halfway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and it has a large community of English speakers. And I thought, like, I'll drive to Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or even Haifa to go hear an author speak who I want to hear, but I'm not sure everybody else would do that. So let me bring the authors to the people, and that's how Literary Modine started. But then the pandemic hit, so we moved to Zoom. And then I needed something to look forward to every month during the pandemic. So I made it a monthly thing, and now it's become a thing. And next month we'll have our 60th event. And this Sunday night, occasionally I've gone back to in-person hybrid events. So this picture over here on the bottom right is from the event we just had Sunday night with Ayelet Sabari and Joan Legant and Avner Landis and the new books. So that's how it's going now in 2025 is Literary Modine. Okay, that was a long introduction. But let me talk a little bit about the book for a second. So the Book of Jeremiah is a novel in stories that tells the tale of Jeremiah Gerstler and his family, and it spans from his childhood in the Depression through the modern period. And every story, what's novel in stories? Every story can be read as a standalone. And in fact, as I was telling you, they were all written as standalones, but taken together, they kind of form the picture of a life. And I wasn't thinking about this as I was writing each story. My main goal was just to write a good story. But when I put everything together and the book came out, people were asking me, well, what's the main takeaway? No, I have to I have to figure it out. And so I guess a central question that the book asks is, how should we live? How should we act towards our family, towards our friends? Jeremiah is many things. He's a son, he's a brother, eventually he's a husband and a father. He's an academic, he's a Jew. He also might be someone that feels familiar to you, like a member of your family, like the kooky uncle, or as a kid, he was kind of a wilde chaya, a wild animal as a kid. He's ambitious, and hardworking, but he's very insecure. One unique thing about the book is its structure. It jumps back and forth over time. So the first story, which takes place in 1938, is when Jeremiah is 11, and then it jumps all the way forward to, what year is that? Towards 2000 to 2006, when he's just celebrated his 80th birthday. Then it goes back to the 50s when he's like in his 20s, and then jumps back to when his wife was celebrating her 60th birthday. So it really goes back and forth over time. And it's kind of like a puzzle. A few readers didn't like that, but most people had a positive reaction to that. So what are some main things that I did when I was writing the book? As I mentioned, I come from a close-knit family, and I drew a lot on family lore. And it could be just a small thing, or it could be a big thing. And the first story in the book is called A Strong Hand and an Outstretched Arm. It takes place, or it starts, the first scene in the story starts on Purim, when Jeremiah is dressed as a shochet, a ritual slaughterer. And why did I have this image in my mind, or why did I don't remember my exact thought processes when I was writing this book, but if you see here this picture, there's a kid here holding a sign that says Reb Chaim der Shochet, and if you look, you can see on the thing that it's my father when he was a kid. He was the grandson of a kosher butcher, and for Purim, his mother thought it'd be fun if he dressed up as a shochet, and he actually carried around a live chicken in his synagogue at Rhoda Shalom in Bridgeport, Connecticut. So I had this image in my mind of my father, carrying around a chicken, and I guess that's what sparked this thought of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah in the story is the wilde chaya I was talking about. He's a handful for his mother. And my dad was not like that at all, but the image of my dad as the shochet kind of sparked this. And unlike in the story, I do have Jeremiah carrying a real chicken, but I don't have him carrying a real knife. But in the real life version of this, my father did carry a real shochet's knife. So maybe I'll read a few minutes from that story. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna just like skip a few parts, but I'll read a little bit from the first scene. Okay. Ricky's son keeps the live chicken tucked under his arm, giving it a little zets every time the wicked Haman's name is chanted. She flinches with each squawk, but Jeremiah seems unconcerned by his mother's squeamishness. Relax, what's to be afraid of, says Ricky's husband. Leave it to Abe to dream up the perm costume of a ritual slaughterer for their 11-year-old, arranging with the fowl market in East Bridgeport to borrow the bird for the night. Mottled, tea-colored feathers drift to the floor, and Ricky collects them in tissues so the synagogue won't look like a chicken coop. Looped around Jeremiah's belt is a 6-inch-long fake knife made out of plastic, a straight blade with no point at the end. Abe, son of a kosher butcher himself, has declared the imitation to be very close to what a real shochet would use, though the chicken does not seem worried. When the reading is over, everyone shuffles into the social hall for the costume contest and other festive perm activities. A better costume for him you couldn't pick, says the synagogue's Hebrew teacher, shedding her exasperation. Ricky offers a tight, uncomfortable smile. She detects an underhanded compliment. The man is not in the habit of heaping praise on her middle child. A firm hand at home, some discipline is what he needs, the teacher had said only a few weeks ago, following Jeremiah's third prank in class. Abe's many good qualities do not include toughness in the discipline department. Jeremiah is surrounded by a circle of boys, waving their hands in his face. He bounces up and down, organizing the group into a line. An older boy fumbles with something in his pocket and procures 2 coins in exchange for a turn with the chicken. What in the world? Her son checks his wristwatch and after a minute signals to the boy that his time is up. With one hand, he reclaims the bird, extending his other palm to the next boy in line. No, Ricky arrives as the second boy fishes 2 pennies out of his pocket. We've got to give this chicken back tomorrow. We can't pass him around. Put your money away. Ma, Jeremiah starts, but his disappointment seems mild. He points to the older boy. I'm not giving Howie back his money. He already got his turn. She doesn't have to look far to see where he comes up with these cockamamie ideas. Abe, over in the corner with a group of men, seems barely older than a boy himself, a baseball cap in place of his yarmulke. During the costume fashion show, the clapping intensifies when Jeremiah takes his turn. The chicken twists and strains as if wanting to escape, and her son makes a show of it, screwing his face into funny expressions. A regular performer, Abe's pals say, patting him on the back. Ricky would like to scurry after Jeremiah to collect the shedding feathers, but Abe holds her back. She wishes her affectionate feelings for Jeremiah would come more naturally. She is nagged by guilt that they don't. She knows she shouldn't compare her boys, but from Lenny she gets nachas, pride in his accomplishments. From Jeremiah, only tsuris, troubles and more troubles. A hush falls over the crowd as the rabbi announces the results of the costume contest. He proclaims Jeremiah as the overall winner, and the little shochet beams as if he's just eaten a month's worth of brisket. He bounds up to the stage to collect his prize, holding the chicken over his head in a victory pose. Even at a distance, Ricky recognizes the mischievous gleam in her son's eye. She recites a silent prayer. He won't fling the poor creature into the crowd. Frowning, the rabbi leans over to whisper something to Jeremiah. At once, the impish grin recedes, and Jeremiah tucks the chicken back under his arm. Ricky is faint with relief, but mortified, her cheeks scarlet. The rabbi obviously senses her son is a troublemaker and his parents' failures. But the rabbi laughs. Wrong holiday. Never wasting an educational opportunity, he explains. Waving a chicken over the head to atone for sins is performed before Yom Kippur, not Purim. You see, Abe whispers. He knows he hasn't behaved well lately, so he's repenting. Ricky's throat is dry. She's never heard her son express remorse for his mischief. Repent, she asks? I should live so long. So that's just a little taste of the first scene, and there you have the visual of the shochet. By the way, my father is sitting next to Richard Belzer, who became a famous actor. Okay. Uh, so I had another story, and this kind of really got me into historical research. A story called Signals, where Jeremiah is a soldier in World War II. And like my maternal grandfather, it was natural for me to place Jeremiah in the Signal Corps. That's where my grandfather served. And he actually wrote down all his every place he was after he landed on the continent, a little bit after D-Day, about a month and a half after D-Day. So he was also kind of the inspiration. My grandfather was a married man, had an active law practice, was about to start a family, but he enlisted in 1943. And he spent time all over France and Belgium and Germany. And he, at some point, he visited Paris, and he's also an amateur photographer. So we have some pictures from that. But in the story, Jeremiah meets his brother's girlfriend. But he didn't know that his brother Lenny is also served in the army. It's his older brother, and this is not really a spoiler. He was killed in the Battle of Bulge. So after his brother dies, he hears from this girlfriend we didn't know existed, and they meet in Paris in July of 1945. So again, that's a little bit of family lore. Made it in. But I had to also do a lot of research. I knew my grandfather was in the Signal Corps, but what did that mean? So I read all sorts of things about, what was his unit doing in France? And they were laying cables and repairing, radio lines and things like that. And the other main character, the girlfriend in the story, she was a combat nurse. So I also was reading up about what would the experience of a combat nurse have been during certain battles. And I really loved all of the history research. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. This is just a tidbit or two about these pictures. Sometimes the family lore just made it into one line in a story. There's a story that takes place in Israel when Jeremiah is visiting Israel with his wife and adult daughter, and they go meet some cousins, and they hear about how their cousin was a medic during the War of Independence, and how he treated, and he was involved in the battle for Eilat, and he treated the Egyptians, after the battle was over, he treated the Egyptian soldiers. So this over here is my grandfather's cousin Yitzchak, and that's a picture of him with the Egyptian soldiers, and he would talk about how they would trade cigarettes and treat each other. And yeah, so that was only made it into one line in the book, but some inspiration. I mentioned before that, did I mention? I don't remember that Molly is a big baker. Oh, that I'm a baker. But the brownies figure prominently in a few stories. And there's one more story where there's a character who's a gun runner for the Haganah in 1948 in New York. And that was actually also based on my cousin and my great uncle. And my cousin, who's now deceased, also was a writer, and he wrote his own story, actually called The Gun Runner. And then again, this is my father-in-law repairing, helping build houses, rebuild things in New Orleans after Katrina. That made it into one line in another story. So that is a few more things. Okay. So several of the stories, particularly the ones that take place in the 1930s to the 1970s, sent me down these paths to learn more about different events. And my mother is a former American history teacher, so this was perfect for me. And I really loved this aspect of the writing, was the research. And I would research things that I would know nothing about, or and sometimes it was kind of a fun thing. Here, the first story, chronologically speaking, takes place in 1932. and it's actually told from Lenny's point of view, Jeremiah's brother. And the two boys sneak out of their house to go listen to the World Series, which actually in 1932, games 3 and 4 took place on Rosh Hashanah. That's why they had to sneak out. And you can really find anything these days with research. So, like, I found the whole, what happened in every inning with every pitch. And some of that, made it into the story when they're listening to the radio announcer. You're hearing the announcer talk about the different, fly balls or whatever. Let's see. Oh, no, I can't do an animation, I think. That's oh no, here. Awakening is another story in the book in which one of the characters we find out has taken some magic mushrooms. And someone said to me, well, I don't, it's kind of unexpected. I don't believe that character would have done that. But I had found this big Life magazine article written by this New York banker in 1957, where before it was such a taboo thing, about how he and his wife went all over Mexico and went all over the world searching for magic mushrooms. So again, that made it. Okay. Another story that I did a lot of research for is called Gerstler's Triumphant Return. It takes place in December 1972, at the tail end of the Vietnam War. And Jeremiah is in that story. He's on a field trip with his daughter's history class, and they're in Washington, and they talk their way into a State Department briefing. And so I read, like, academic papers about this. This was one that was put out by the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And there's different things that I took in here, like, for my story. When they're in the press conference, some of the questions that the journalists are asking, and the responses were given, came from actual events. Let me take a sip of my water. Okay. If we have time, I'll read you a section from that story as well. Just want to tell you one more thing about another source of inspiration. The last story I wrote I wrote it in 2014, and it's called Tough Day for LBJ, which takes place in 1964, the summer of 1964. And I had written another story previously that took place in summer of 64 that I decided I didn't want to keep. Like, I threw out the whole story. The only thing I kept was the time frame, summer of 64, and the setting, the Berkshires. I literally opened up Google and typed in, like, summer 1964, and the first thing that popped up was the pictures of the missing civil rights workers, who were their bodies were eventually found in a Mississippi dam. And we were still having this terrible summer in Israel in 2014, when the 3 Israeli boys were kidnapped and were murdered. And I just saw the similarities between those two pictures really struck me. I said, okay, I must write about this. So the story is told from Jeremiah's point of view, and his wife his wife has, like, a very tenuous connection to Andrew Goodman. She thinks maybe she babysat for him a long time ago. But I like that interplay of, how did real events, how are they affecting my characters? And especially Jeremiah, at the time, he had just moved his family. He has a PhD in political science. I don't know if I mentioned that. He's an academic. But initially he goes and works in Washington, D.C. for the government. And then he's just decided to make the move back to academia. And he's moved his young family up to the Berkshires for a job at a fictional university. And and so I kind of play off the actual things that are happening in the world. And the reason it's called Tough Day for LBJ is because on the same day that the bodies of the three civil rights workers were found, there was an escalation in the Gulf of Tonkin, which led to there was an event in the Gulf of Tonkin, which then led to the escalation in Vietnam. So I did, and this story I probably did the most research on. I have, was reading not just newspaper articles, but I read the eulogies. I read, declassified papers about the Gulf of Tonkin, transcripts of the press conference, a lot of different things, a lot of research. And sometimes I'll have it like, if I only have an hour to write, and then I go down a research rabbit hole, I'll end up, writing like one sentence, but reading and learning about what I'm researching that day. So, okay. So very briefly, I wrote the first story, the one about the Jeremiah as an 82-year-old in, I think, 2010. And then I continued to write for the next several years. Oh yeah, I said the last story I started in 2014, but I was still revising, and submitting to journals. I'll say that when you're writing short stories, you want to put together a collection. You want to have those stories published in literary journals. Now, it's very hard to get published. You have to send them out and get rejection after rejection. This is very subjective. Your story just has to land with like an editor that it speaks to, and they get thousands and thousands of submissions. Even tiny little literary journals get thousands of submissions, and they only publish, maybe once or twice a year, and they can only publish maybe 10 stories a year, if that. So the vast majority of stories get rejected. But if you really believe in your stories, you keep sending them out, and sometimes you revise and send out, and that's what happened with that. Actually, that first story that I read to you from, the tough, strong hand and outstretched arm with the shochet, that story I sent out over 100 times until it got accepted. So you have to really have thick skin. And then I had the challenge of, I knew like once that about half of the stories published, I could then start submitting, trying to get the whole collection published. So I didn't even try to get an agent. I was told, oh, for a story collection, you can go straight to the small presses. So that's what I did. And I was applying all different places. And finally, in 2018, I got this email that said, "Dear Julie, congratulations. Your collection is the runner-up for this award, and we'd like to publish your book." What? I had to read the email like 4 or 5 times until it sank in. And then it took another whole year after that until the book actually came out. So that's what I had to say about the Book of Jeremiah. I'm happy to take questions afterwards, but I wanted to talk for a moment about literary modi'in. As I mentioned, it's an author series where we feature 3 authors every time with it has to be like a little bit of Jewish content in the book. It doesn't have to be a major amount. And we've had many of the same speakers as you've had at Qesher, Ziva Bukai, Jennifer Lang, Sarah Ansbacher, Lynn Gladner, Elizabeth Graver, and probably more. So if anyone wants to get on the mailing list, I think tomorrow they're going to send around a presentation. You'll have the link, but you should just subscribe to my newsletter, and then you'll hear about the monthly events. I have more in the presentation, but it's just some bonus recipes, bonus things, just for fun. And maybe I did this during COVID, I think, also just for fun, as I like put some recipes up because Molly, Jeremiah's wife, is a big baker, and that features a lot in the book. There's like I put some recipes along with, the quote from the book. So you probably all have recipe for knedlach, but this is my mother's recipe. And bonbons, they're really yummy, very dangerous. Some brownies. And then, this when I was really bored, I made a whole recipe book for Passover recipes. And you can download the link if you'd like. And yeah, that's it. I think.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you everyone for being here. Now we're going to get into questions, so please feel free to put in your questions or raise your hand, or if you want to ask or comment, you are also welcome to just unmute and do it. And all this presentation that Julie just shared with you will be sent out to you by an email tomorrow, so you will receive information about where to get the book and about literary modi'in and the recipes and everything else that Julie just shared with you. So while we are waiting for some questions, do you want to, Julie, read the part that you
Sure.
to read?
Sure. Okay, so this is from the story called Gerstler's Triumphant Return. It's when he's as I said, he's chaperoning his daughter's 10th grade history class on a trip to Washington. Let me take a little more sip of my water. Sec. They're right now on a tour of the State Department. Jeremiah checked his watch. 10:40 a.m. He sidled over to the tour guide. Would it be too much trouble to see if we can stay for the briefing? The kids would love it. He motioned to his daughter and a few other students. We've got a bunch of student journalists in this group. A few of them, as if on cue, produced reporters' notepads. The tour guide looked uncertainly at them and then back at Jeremiah. She deliberated for a few moments, glanced at her watch, back at the kids, and then down the empty hallway. Usually school groups need to get permission ahead of time, but it's almost Christmas, so I guess it'll be all right. You can stand in the back, but please don't interrupt during the briefing. Once the press is finished, I'll see if a public relations officer can answer your questions. The students buzzed with excitement, and Jeremiah gave the tour guide a genuine smile and thanks. As they filed into the press room, lining the yellow walls, Bruno, the history teacher, held back a smaller group of students before directing them to different locations around the room. Oh, I should say that they're right this week when they're in Washington was the week that the U.S. Launched what was called the Christmas time bombings, or Operation Linebacker. It was like the last big push at the end of the Vietnam War. Not everybody was happy about it. Okay. So Bruno, the history teacher, held back a smaller group of students before directing them to different locations around the room. Jeremiah stood along a side wall, scrutinizing the reporters. The press was not sympathetic to this latest bombing campaign. He wondered how tough their questions would be. After the spokesman's brief statement, the reporters fired question after question like a tennis ball launcher. Thump, thump, thump. Jeremiah marveled at their ability to grab onto the slightest of hints in the spokesman's body language or the particular way he phrased a point. Has the administration considered that the bombings will only harden Hanoi's stance? Thump. Sources say the president ordered the B-52 attacks on civilians as a mauling operation to show Hanoi his determination. Thump. That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous, libelous statement. We don't target civilians. Next. So you may strike civilians even though you don't target them. Is that correct? No comment. Is it your position that you don't discuss civilian casualties? No comment. Patiently, the spokesman lobbed the answers back at the journalists, reiterating earlier statements. The man could not be rattled, even as the questions grew more urgent. Jeremiah was both impressed with the spokesman's composure and frustrated by it. He would have liked the man to show some sensitivity, a little regret for civilian casualties and the massive destruction the U.S. was causing in Hanoi, sorrow for the 35 Air Force men downed since the operation began. At that moment, Bruno, the history teacher, raised his right hand to his forehead and lifted 1, 2, 3 fingers. The sound started as a buzz, almost imperceptible, but soon the entire room could hear the undeniable chorus of "Give Peace a Chance." The hum grew louder into a mantra, a few students, Hannah included, singing the words under their breaths as reporters turned in their seats, mirthful grins on their faces. Jeremiah himself could not suppress a chortle. The spokesman scowled at the tour guide, now cowering against a back wall, hands at her cheeks. Jeremiah felt a little guilty. The woman would probably lose her job. The spokesman waited for the students to finish their song so he could resume his answers. But one song flowed into the next, from Fortunate Son to Blowing in the Wind to Bring Them Home. Jeremiah sang along as best he could. He didn't know all the words. After initial attempts to restore the quiet, the spokesman shrugged his shoulders and shouted to the reporters, "I guess that's it for now, folks. Merry Christmas." Just then, the class hoodlum and 3 other students raced to block the spokesman's exit. The reporters sprang into action, snapping pictures, asking for details, names, school, ages, and the students' opinions of the bombing. Jeremiah felt his chest expanding with delight over his daughter and her classmates. He loved these kids. He'd be crushed if any of them were sent over there. Yet he realized they were 2 short years away from compulsory service. Given recent events, he no longer trusted Nixon would keep his word and end the draft. Images of bodies flooded his memory. Scattered corpses on the frozen ground in France and Belgium almost 30 years before, the snow bloodied and crimson. A picture of his brother's inert body, a figment carried in his imagination since Lenny had fallen in the Battle of the Bulge, now mixed with visions of his dead student, Anthony, and the snapshots coming out of Hanoi. U.S. servicemen and Vietnamese soldiers and civilians alike, all lifeless. Tens of thousands of families broken by a son's death in battle, just as his own had been. Each life an entire universe. Rationally, he knew the 2 conflicts were vastly different, and he brooked no regret over U.S. involvement in World War II or any war that was just, but this felt different. "What happened to Kissinger's peace is at hand statement?" Jeremiah yelled, directing his anger over the bombing campaign at the spokesman. "Peace, peace," he promised, but there's no peace. He nearly choked up a moment ago thinking of Lenny, but now, looking at these kids so young, he fumed. He was through being quaint and rational. He didn't care for discourse now. 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want your fucking war, Jeremiah chanted, fist in the air. Within seconds, the entire 10th grade class was stomping their feet and bellowing with him. Their voices thrummed with passion. The room felt ablaze with their heat and the glare from the photographer's flashes. They kept it going for almost a quarter of an hour until security pried the students loose and snapped handcuffs on Jeremiah and Bruno, leaving the only other parent chaperone with the kids. The cold metal cuffs cut into his flesh, but his hands seemed detached from his body, his whole being coursed with energy, a sense of vigor and righteousness he hadn't felt in years, if ever.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And now there are a few questions that came in, so I will read them. There's a question from Pessy Kraus. "Thank you for your insights into research behind your writing. Was it difficult to create stories once you had background knowledge?" And she's part of your wonderful literary
Yes,
group.
yes. Thanks, Pessy. No, I tried not to get I tried to use the research more for details, for specificity in the writing. I had, for the most part, I had the ideas of the plot, but I used the research for, to fill in details or maybe some character development. Also, I mean, it was a little organic. One thing I forgot to say about the Tough Day for LBJ story, the one about the civil rights workers, is that after I wrote that story, I sent it to my mother, who's my first reader, and she said, "Oh, well, you know that your uncle was in Mississippi that summer, volunteering with lawyers for civil rights or something." I had no idea. So I ended up interviewing my uncle, and probably that made it only into like one line in the whole story. But then I had like 4 pages of notes about my uncle's summer in Mississippi, and then I sent it around to my family. Kind of like full circle of the family lore and the research, and going back. So,
Thank you. Will you have an audio version of the book?
I would love to have an audio version of the book, and my publisher just did the paperback and the ebook. And if I want to create an audio version of I could do it on my own. I literally, an hour before this started, was reading somebody's post about it's not as hard to do as you think. So maybe so far it hasn't come out, but maybe I'll take that as a summer project.
Very nice. So if there are any other questions, please feel free to put them. In the meantime, I'll ask a few. So I found it interesting that the book has the title of the book has a very biblical connotation, and if you had any purpose with that or any message with that.
Yeah, I get that question a lot. I don't know if my answer is satisfying, but true story. I kind of randomly named the character Jeremiah because the summer before I wrote the story, I'd been working at a summer camp and I had a problematic camper named Jeremiah. And it just kind of popped in my head to use that as a name. But then I went back and I did take some things from the original book of Jeremiah. In fact, what I just read to you from that scene in the State Department when he says something like peace, peace, where is it? I don't know. I lost the place. He says like peace, peace, but there's no peace. That's from the original book of Jeremiah and a few other places in the book. I sprinkled some things in. There's one story where he feels like a laughing stock, and the original Jeremiah also worries that he's a laughing stock with his prophecy.
Okay, great. Thank you. And what I was wondering when you were sharing about the stories and how they go through history, that you finished writing this book in 2014. And since then, so much has happened in the world. Like, what story would you add if you were finishing the book now?
Well, actually, I have a whole sequel that I'm trying to get published now, but it's not exactly a sequel. It's more of a sister volume because some of the stories take place, earlier chronologically speaking than the stories in this book, and some take place after. So, by the way, I didn't think I was going to write a sister volume. I thought I was done. And I remember I told you I love prompts. So a friend of mine, about 6 months after the book came out, sent me this call for submission by NPR. Said, "Oh, they do. They always have a Hanukkah hour where they read Hanukkah stories, fiction. I'm sure you have a Hanukkah story. You know what? I don't have a Hanukkah story." So I took that as a prompt and I wrote a new story just based on one line in one story in this book where Jeremiah mentions that he's gone on a trip to the Baseball Hall of Fame with his grandson. And so I ended up writing a whole new story about this trip to the Baseball Hall of Fame. It takes place over Hanukkah. And then that became the first story that I wrote of this new collection. In the newer book, there are some more stories that have some modern, more recent things. Like there's he attends a gay wedding, was that takes place in 2015, where gay marriages were already legal in Massachusetts. In the earlier time periods, obviously that wasn't the case. There's a story that has some DNA testing. But yeah, I still don't know how Jeremiah would react to the Trump era. Let's put it that way. Like the last story, chronologically speaking, in the new volume still doesn't get that far. It's in 2015, so I don't think he'd be very happy with it.
Thank you. And I was also wondering if there is any character in the book who you identify with.
Um, Probably his wife, Jeremiah's wife, Molly. Uh, mm, she's kind of the glue that keeps the family together. Um, she's she's a music teacher, and that's her profession. It's not what I do, but I like music. And she's very into. She has a lot of different interests: baking, gardening, things like that that I also like. So I guess Molly, I would be most similar to Molly.
Thank you. And I just noticed that Passy had a follow-up question to the previous one about your uncle. So once you knew of your uncle, did you make any changes in the book?
I think I added a line or two. It wasn't major changes. It was just like more details. Um, yeah, about the civil rights workers that summer.
I wanted to ask you if you were in any way influenced by Philip Roth's novels. Some of the stories and settings really reminded me of some of his.
Oh, well, that is a big compliment because I love Philip Roth. Um, I was so he's one of my favorite authors, so I'm sure I was influenced by him. I'm not sure I can point a direct connection um to the stories, but what I'm hoping to achieve with my book is exactly what I feel when I read a Philip Roth book. Especially, I think my favorite is The Human Stain because I read it and just kept me up at night thinking about it, like thinking about the dilemmas in that book. And to me, that's the mark of really great book is anything that gets you to really think things through. In fact, I think I have a line in here with one of the characters, Hannah, his daughter, when she's an adult already, about talking about um any sort of similar to what I just said, that like she reserved her highest praise for the, hearing speakers or reading books that really get her to think at night, lie in bed at night thinking about dilemmas. And that's what I feel when I read a Philip Roth book.
Great. Thank you so much. So I don't see no more questions, but we will definitely send out Julie's presentation, and you can be in touch with her, and you will find a way to order her book. Or Sebastian, do you have another question?
Yeah, no, I saw Pessy also wrote if you could write the name of the authors that you were influenced by.
Ah, I thought just the author that she's speaking about. So I just wrote down Philip Roth, but it's true.
Okay, so see
You can
Yeah,
you
I'll
can
I'll
mention
I'll
more.
write that down. I'll write down for a second. Philip Roth, Elizabeth Strout. Um, those are the first two that come to mind. But I also love oh God, no, I'm blanking on her name. All right, I'll think about it. Um, my God, she won the National Book Award. Jewish woman writer from Boston. She passed away a few years ago. Hold on, I'll look. While I'm looking, though, I want to say um two other things. One is that um for me, writing is a way to understand what I think. Like it's revelatory. I write story. I don't really know what I'm doing when I start out. I just know I want to write a story. I might start with an image in my mind. I might start with a setting, maybe even a first line that comes to my mind, and then I write the story, and then I kind of understand what it's about. And sometimes I understand like, oh, that's what I think about this issue. So it's revelatory process for me. And the last thing I'll say is that I love meeting with book clubs. So if any of you are in book clubs at home, in your communities, your library, your synagogue, your Hadassah chapter, or wherever, or private book clubs, I'd be really, really happy to meet with your book club. Now let me look for the name of that. Oh, Edith Perlman. Yeah, I didn't have to look it up. Edith Perlman. Um,
Great. Thank you so much,
Those are
Julie.
some of my favorites.
Okay, now we have the names here,
Yeah.
so people want to have further ideas of what to read, then these are some recommendations from Julie. So thank you also for that. Thank you, Julie, for sharing your book with us and this wonderful presentation. And thank you everyone for being here with us today. As always, tomorrow we'll send you the recording of this talk and further information, the presentation that Julie shared with us. And we hope to see you very soon. Our next event is this Thursday, which is going to be very exciting. We invited the CEO of the Commonwealth Jury, which is a lot of different countries. And this Thursday, he's going to focus on Singapore, Kenya, Malta, and the Channel Islands. So you will learn about the Jewish communities of these places, and of course, in general, about the Commonwealth. And on Sunday, we'll have a talk about the Bukharian Jews and the Jews of the Silk Road, where the Bukharian Jews lived for many, many centuries in that area. So we hope you can join us also for some of these events. And we wish you a wonderful rest of the day or good night in Israel, or I see even in Turkey. We have met in here even later than in Israel, I think, right now. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day if you still have some hours left.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.